Hello and welcome everybody to what I am sure is going to be a very interesting webinar today, talking about taste and smell, or smell and taste. I'm not quite sure which way around to do it, but I think politically I should be saying smell first of all, because I think for lots of us, we won't have actually really thought very much about our smell and taste. We take it for granted. We're kind of aware of it when it disappears when we've got a cold. And and it's only more recently with long COVID that people have been aware of one of the symptoms and issues that can happen with your smell. But obviously, as I was just been talking to Chrissi, that people do have problems with smell from way before long COVID, but it's just now I think people are more aware. So I'd like to start off by introducing Chrissi Kelly, who is the founder of the charity called AbScent. And Chrissi, welcome.
Thank you very much.
And I think what would be nice is if we, hear about your story, because you have a very interesting background story, which then evolves into how you then founded the charity.
Yes, that's right. Excuse me. I have what's called COVID throat, which is sort of a hoarse voice. So I'm sorry to everyone in the audience. You'll have to bear with me on that. Yes, I lost my sense of smell originally in 2012. At that time, there was very little information out there on smell loss or ways that you could connect with other people and maybe share your story, that sort of thing. So like most people, I was suffering in silence. I had profound smell loss just from a sinus infection. And when that finally cleared, there was nothing left. And eventually, a couple of months later, I developed parosmia. And this phase of my recovery with parosmia really took 2 years. And it wasn't until 2 years had passed that I started getting glimmers of something that would, for instance, bring back my appetite. So it was a very, very difficult time for me. I experienced a really profound depression. I would even go as far as to say I felt like my personality had changed. And it's a very destabilizing thing, especially if you're unprepared and you've got no access to information about it. I really did feel very, very isolated. Then things sort of moved on, and I was introduced to the concept of smell training by an ENT that I saw. And this fascinated me because as soon as I started smell training, I realized how beneficial it was for me, both from the point of view of improving my sense of smell, because we know that that's what smell training does. It's been very well researched in all different kinds of settings, but also because it gave me some kind of feeling of agency, where I had been told by the first ENT that I saw, if it doesn't come back in 6 months, well, you're just going to get used to it. And that phrase, I still hear him in my mind. And every time I replay that memory in my head, I just feel a gripping and horrible sensation in my stomach. So to be told that there's no way out is a very frightening feeling. And having that little tiny bit of control over it by doing smell training every day really did make me feel better. So there was kind of a twofold benefit to that. So time went on a bit, and of course, somebody gave me a copy of the original article, which was published in 2009. So when I got into it, it was still very unknown. And I can remember going into a Facebook group called Anosmics of the World Unite and saying, oh, has anyone tried smell training? And then I just got this wave of negativity. Oh, that's a joke. That's what they tell you just to fob you off and all these kind of things. And so I went to the original articles, which by 2013, there had been another one. And the trouble for me was that there were no real instructions given on how to smell train. So I was kind of doing trial and error and learning as I went. And in 2015, I felt that I'd learned enough, and I thought, well, I'll start a small Facebook group around smell training, which is what I did. And I can remember getting my 100th member and thinking, oh, wow, that's really amazing. And in those days, I was, of course, interacting with every single person that came into the Facebook group. And I used the feedback that I got from people there to help me perfect the kind of smell training protocol, if we can call it that we now promote and talk about within AbScent. So that's kind of that gives you a little bit of the background. And we became a registered charity in May of 2019. That took a lot of work, as you might expect. And so in February of 2020, on Anosmia Awareness Day, which is the 27th of February, we were having our official launch event. And I remember thinking, and this was in London, and I remember thinking, well, I hope this pandemic thing isn't going to, put a dent in our event. And I thought to myself, well, let's have our event, and then I'm going to worry about the pandemic. Well, of course, what happened? We had 1,500 members in the group at that time, so a well-established Facebook group, just called AbScent Anosmia Support, and it just went exponential from there. By the time we reached the end of the year 2020, there were 18,000 people, and wow. Today we have over 75,000 people across all of our platforms. So we've seen a lot of people. Most of the people that we look after now are people who have lost their sense of smell from COVID-19. But as you and I were just saying, Katrina, what's really important to say is that smell loss and smell dysfunction is not something new. It's been with us for a very, very long time indeed. And no one's ever heard about it because it's been very, very difficult to get funding bodies and people who do clinical research to actually pay attention to this. Smell is a very underrated sense. And so I'm as awful as it is, especially for people who have been without smell for years and years and years, it is wonderful to have a spotlight shining on us now and get the attention that we deserve.
It's funny, isn't it? Because I was just going to say, it's great that your charity has grown, but it's sad the fact that it's grown because it's not around just awareness. It's the fact that so many more people now have this issue, really, yes. Isn't it?
Yes.
So, yeah.
If we imagine that something like a half of all people who get COVID-19 experience some kind of smell disturbance, that's actually a lot of people. Now, a really interesting thing about that is that of that half of the people who do have a problem with their sense of smell, and when I say, so if we imagine that, let's see how to put this, there are a lot of people out there who've had COVID-19, who've had impairment to their sense of smell, but are not aware of it. So this 50% figure that I've given you comes from the kind of research where they, instead of asking people how they think their sense of smell is, they give them an objective smell test and they rate them, they rate them, they give them a score, and they find that even though people say that they feel that there's nothing wrong with their sense of smell, actually the test reveals that there is a deficit. And this mismatch between what people think about their sense of smell and what can be objectively measured is well known in olfactory research circles.
And I suppose it doesn't help because your smell, like your taste, as you get older, definitely diminishes as well, doesn't it? I presume it.
Excuse me while I just make this go away. Sorry about that.
I think that's a first for us, actually.
Yeah, I usually remember to turn the phone off.
Yeah, so as you get older, your smell and your taste diminish, but does it diminish or does it just change?
No, it diminishes. In the same way that our vision becomes impaired with age, or we lose our ability to hear certain pitches in sound and might need hearing aids. the sense of smell does gradually degrade. And I think 2/3 of people who are over the age of 80 have no sense of smell at all. Now, the good news for that, for as we age and our sense of smell, is that by using smell training, we can actually keep our sense of smell going. You might be able to improve it, but at the very least, you can keep it where it is at that. And you certainly cannot do that with vision and hearing.
No.
So the sense of smell is quite plastic. We know smell training builds new neural networks. And so that's why smell training is such an important tool for everyone to know about, not just for people who've lost their sense of smell after COVID-19, but just in a general sense. There is evidence to suggest that smell training can help Parkinson's patients who will lose their sense of smell as part of their disease. It will, again, stabilize the sense of smell. And it's also beneficial in terms of improving cognitive function. So it's a wonderful thing. The sense of smell sits in the brain in the most central part of it, where we store memories, where we have much of our personality, where all the emotion is registered. And therefore, our sense of smell operates slightly different than vision and hearing. So the sense of smell is very much tied to our most the elemental parts of our brain function.
Yeah, well, and sort of the emotional thing. So that's why a smell suddenly brings back certain memories, I suppose, or feelings, isn't it?
Exactly. So really intense smell memories are that because they were tied to some sort of an emotional experience at the time. So if you think about your most intense smell memories, very often they'll be associated with maybe holidays, or Christmas is one example that comes to mind, or a summer holiday, or barbecues, the smell of cut grass, things like that. But also, I mean, how many of you will have really strong memories, for instance, of your primary school, and that will be the smell of the lunchroom, or the smell of pencil shavings, or your pencil case, and things like that. So those moments in your life that were full of emotion, they will help you grab onto a smell memory and keep it.
So before we sort of dive into what smell training is, what it does, and also the long COVID side of it, and it was interesting to hear about, the age-related stuff. Is it something that you would recommend that people start at a certain age?
The thing about smell training is that right now, the best way we have of explaining to people what it is by telling them that to use a kit and to do it twice a day, and to do it mindfully, and all that sort of thing that we can go into later. But really, what is smell training in 2 words? It's smell awareness. And smell awareness is something that you can train yourself to have in your life every day, all day. It's a matter of when you walk into a room, picking something up and smelling it. If you go on a walk, remembering to see if you can smell anything, or pick a leaf and see if you can smell it. That kind of thing doesn't come naturally to everyone, but for people for whom it is already a natural thing to do, those people tend to recover more quickly from smell loss more quickly, because they are always asking themselves, what does this smell like? What does this smell like? And it's that inquiry that we really need to build into our lives if we want to extend our olfactory life.
It's sort of being mindful and similar to exercising that muscle.
Exactly.
So yeah.
And it is such a powerful tool. I mean, I know it sounds like a bit of hocus pocus, but actually it can be measured what smell training is doing in the brain. So there was a recent study that showed that after a certain period of smell training, the gray matter of the brain had an altered morphology. In other words, the brain matter actually grew in ways that were visible in an MRI scan. And that's really quite striking. That's not something that you see every day. So it's, I think, really, it shouldn't be underestimated. And another, smell training has so many sort of PR problems, really. Another problem that we see over and over again is there can be a reasonable amount of negativity in the forums about smell training on the basis that it doesn't work for everyone. So when they do studies on the helpfulness of smell training, what they'll typically do is there will be a group of people who've had smell loss, or people who are perfectly healthy. That's in all different kinds of settings. And those people will not do any smell training. They might listen to a podcast, for instance, or do a Sudoku problem every day. And then they'll take the other people and get them in a clinical setting to engage in smell training. And then there are always people who don't benefit, who don't have a recognizable increase in their objective smell score. But the problem is that people, they read that, they'll say, okay, well, there are some people that it won't help them at all. But now if we imagine that people, smell training is a bit like a diet. If I say, here's the diet, go home and do it. Are you going to lose weight? Well, some people will, and some people won't. And the reason why some people won't might have to do with the fact that they're not compliant, that they might cheat, for instance, a little bit. And then there will be other people who maybe have a metabolic problem and don't lose any weight. So it's a gray area. It's very difficult to pick apart why it might not be working for some people. But I know that, this is something that we observe all the time in the Facebook group. If you query people more closely, they'll say, well, I didn't do it every day, or I might not have done, it needs to be done all the time, like stroke rehab. It's something that you need to give attention to every day. And if you don't, then the new neural networks will not become established.
So before we go on to, because we're talking about it, but we haven't actually said what it entails, but before we do that, is it something that you do the training and you get to a certain level and then you don't have to continue it, or do you have to carry on, or you will lose it again?
Interesting question. So one piece of research found that these people had done smell training for 4 months. They had increased their objective scores by X percent. There's a good percent. I don't have the figures in my head at the moment, but it was a statistically significant. And for anyone that knows anything about statistics, when they say it's statistically significant, that's actually a number for them. So it was a really a good result. And what they did was, at the end of that, they let those people go home, and then they got back to them a year later and tested them again. And they had dropped off a little bit, but they still were above where they had been before they had done the smell training. So that was one study. Another study, it was not quite so obvious. So that study showed that it would be more valuable to kind of keep up with the smell training. But again, I would say you don't have to actually faff around with the smell training kit every day if you've trained yourself to be more smell aware. And that's everything from the moment you get out of bed in the morning, whether it's the toothpaste or what you think about your food when you take the first bite. We're all used to sitting down for a meal and just wolfing the food down and not paying any attention. Here's a tip for people. If you sit down for a meal, don't take a big mouthful. Start with a tiny microbite and really explore that little tiny morsel of food in your mouth for a few minutes and ask yourself, what's it like? What does it feel like? What does it really taste like? I know those sound like two simple questions, but you can really, once you're used to doing it, you can really explore it to a much greater extent than you think is possible.
And also be mindful of things that means that you do really enjoy your food. You really think about what you're eating, and that usual thing of not necessarily eating more than you really need to.
Exactly.
If you take the time. So it's making sure that you actually enjoy your food as much as anything, isn't it? As opposed to just wolfing it down, which we're all guilty of.
Yep.
So okay, so what tell me about what is smell training?
So let me first say that, I mean, I've already told you that it's like stroke rehab. The other side of that coin is that smell training is not about the thing that you smell. It's about what your brain does with the act of smell training. And there's a lot of misunderstanding here. And I see this, for instance, with aromatherapists who are seeing an opportunity and getting in on the act of selling people aromatherapy kits and things like that. This is not what it's about. There is, and another thing I'd like to add here is that at AbScent, everything that we do is evidence-based. So we don't give any evidence, we don't give any advice that is not supported by scientific research. So when we say, when we recommend smell training, we do that on the basis of what we understand about what the brain does with the smell training experience. And it is certainly not about this or that essential oil. And again, we get a lot of discussion about this on the Facebook groups. And I'm sorry, someone is ringing my doorbell. I'm just going to wait for them to go away. So that's a really important message for everyone. It doesn't matter what you smell. Play-Doh, crayons, rubber bands, whatever you've got in the house, things in your spice drawer. The main thing is that you do it mindfully and that you do it frequently. I think that the original research in 2009 came about, it was done by Professor Hummel, who I have to say is, excuse me, I'm sorry, I have to tell this person to go away.
Gosh, I think poor old Chrissi will be sort of pulling her hair out now with all these things, but I have to say it is extremely important, and that's what we always try to do at Talk Health, is to look at the evidence-based side of everything. And I imagine that there's a lot of people who'll be saying, oh, do this test training, and not really understand properly what it's about. So I would absolutely stress to please do, look at things that are evidence-based. It is hugely important with all health issues, and particularly as we're just talking about now.
And again, apologies. It's just been a day like that. And while we're talking about this and the importance of evidence-based science, anybody who's watching this, who's lost their sense of smell, has been on Instagram, has been on TikTok, has heard about things like head flicking, burning oranges, things like that. And I want to give you all a very important message about how these things become popular and why there is absolutely no benefit to them. This takes a couple of minutes of explanation, so I hope you'll stick with me. We know that people who have COVID-19 smell loss recover in two different patterns. There are the people I call them group A. These are people who recover quickly. 90 to 95% of people who have lost their sense of smell will recover just like that. It might be in a couple of weeks, up to 2 or 3 months, but the resolution to the problem is complete and there are no lingering after effects. These people will have lost their sense of smell because there has been swelling inside their nose, which prevents the air getting to the right place. You might not, if this is you might not feel that you're stuffy. That's because the stuffiness is happening above, way high up in the olfactory cleft, where the special cells are that do the smelling for you. And you might not even be aware that there is any kind of a problem. You might have dry nostrils or sort of funny headaches behind the bridge of your nose, but that's it. So group A, they're very fortunate. They will recover spontaneously. Group B will have experienced nerve damage because the virus has got into their system through the olfactory nerve. And this has then progressed into the olfactory bulb, damaging some of the nerves as it goes. Now, the olfactory system is extremely resilient and it does regenerate, but the regeneration is incredibly slow. And there is no drug that we know of. There is no intervention that we know of that can reverse this damage. I'd like those of you who are in the audience who've had that kind of long-term smell loss to think of it like a broken leg. Your leg breaks, it's set. There's not a thing that you can do for the next 8 weeks except just let it heal. Now, let's think about what happens when you have people from group A and group B, and if you've just lost your sense of smell, you've got no way of knowing whether you're in group A or group B until such time has passed that you think, okay, I've obviously got long-term smell loss. So now imagine you've got these two groups of people in a Facebook forum. Nobody really says it's been a week for me or it's been 3 months for me. What you hear about is people expressing their anxiety over their smell loss, their willingness to try anything, and then, of course, discussing everything going, whether it's smell training, alpha lipoic acid, vitamin A drops, head flicking, the burning orange trick, whatever it is, everyone's talking about it. Now imagine that you're a person who is in group A, and like everyone else, you've been on TikTok, you've tried everything. And then one day, spontaneously, you recover, because we know that's what happens with group A. And you think that the thing you did this morning is the cure. So you get onto TikTok, you go onto Facebook or whatever platform you're on, and you say, I've tried this. This is the solution. Now, we've seen this with the burning orange trick on TikTok. I don't know how many million views that person had. It looks like it's working for group A, but group A would recover anyway.
Oh, that's really interesting.
And now you imagine that the people in group B who are long-termers are looking at these miraculous recoveries and thinking to themselves, why isn't this working for me? And so we can let the sort of TikTok cures, the burnt orange and the head flicking and all that by the side. There's absolutely no scientific basis for that at all. But what's left, what's washed up on the shore in group B is the fact that smell training has been tarred by the same brush. So you'll see all these people who say, I tried smell training for a week. It really worked for me. Yes, it really is the solution. It wasn't the solution for those people. They would have recovered anyway. And so for people who are listening to this, who have had smell loss for a longer period of time, believe me, the science backs it up. Long-term use of smell training is the best thing you can do for yourself. It's not a cure, but it's a way of making the recovery process faster. And nothing is sadder for me than to hear people who are in the long-term group say, I tried smell training once and it's not for me. It is because what you cannot risk doing. And in fact, I've just been giving a talk to some aromatherapists. It's a tragedy to turn long-termers off of smell training when it is in fact the one thing that we know that helps.
That is so, what you said is so important, and it's lack of knowledge and understanding what the issues are. And I suppose so we're talking about nerve damage, and we know that nerves take a long, long time to find their way back, if that's how it works.
Exactly.
I mean,
if you think someone who's had a stroke or someone who's had Bell's palsy, for instance, it takes a really, really long time for those nerves to come back. I mean, I sliced the tip off the end of my finger, about 5 months ago now. And still doesn't feel right. It takes nerves a long time to knit back together again.
Absolutely. So going back to the question, nerve training, smell training is more about being mindfulness or awareness of what you're doing. It's the act of it as opposed to smelling something, a specific thing.
Yeah. Yes. So when I'm giving instruction in smell training, and I'm using the kit, so.
Oh, and this is the time for me now, Chrissy, to do a plug that we do have a giveaway on Talk Health, which I have to say, I've been really pleased, has been hugely popular with people. So Good. Yeah, and what's I think now, especially, oh sorry, I probably disappeared now because the sun's come out. Is the fact is that it's important for lots of people for various reasons, and the diminishing smell is really important because we haven't spoken about the mental health aspect, which I know you're very keen to mention as well, and I think that's really important. So yeah. Anyway, go on to Talk Health and get your name down to hopefully get a kit from Chrissy.
If you buy one of our kits, or if you make your own kit, of course, we have instructions on the website. We recommend little jars like this. So this is a 1 ounce jar, and into the jar, we've got an absorbent pad. So AbScent has special absorbent pads made for us that are used in perfumery industry. And at the bottom, and so we've got a pad inside. If you're making at home, you can use something like blotting paper that's thick and that traps the essential oil. And we recommend essential oils just because they're convenient. You did hear me say a little while ago that we don't think that lavender is better than lemongrass, or that organic is better than non-organic, or anything like that. All you care about is having something really smelly in your jar. I don't like the word smelly. It sounds like it might be bad, but something that's really scented in your jar.
Something that's relatively strong and easy to pick out as a specific smell.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And what you do and we recommend you do this twice a day, of course. If you keep them by your bed, you can do it in the morning when you wake up, and in the evening before you go to bed. You should know that very often when this goes for everybody, not just people with smell loss, but very often in the morning, we're a bit stuffy because we've been lying down, we've been lying flat. And when we stand up, we everything drains down. And so when you've been lying on your back at night, the liquids in your body sort of tend to equalize, and that can mean a tiny bit. You only need a tiny bit of swelling in your nasal passages to create this sort of feeling of stuffiness. So I'd even recommend that you wake up in the morning, make your bed, brush your teeth, take a shower, whatever, and then do your smell training, because by then your nasal passages will have kind of equalized and that morning stuffiness will have drained away if you're the kind of person that has it. So then what you do is you take your jar and you put your nose close. Now, one of the reasons why I recommend jars is because it's a great way to keep your nose away from the essential oils that can be aggressive on the skin. Now, if people smell train from essential oil bottles like this, that's always a really bad idea. Try not to do that. I'll tell you why. So if people sniff from the bottles, number one, they can take that tip and they will inevitably end up touching the skin on their nose, and that can give you irritation. The other thing is, look at the size of that little hole. That's the hole that is letting the scented air out of the bottle. It's tiny. And so you're not going to get as much smell experience from such a tiny hole as you would from something like this, which has got a wide mouth, and you can get your nose right up to it. So that's the reasoning behind the jar, and that's why it's better. Jars are brown. That's really important because essential oils are very sensitive to sunlight and heat. So we keep them in these brown jars. You can, of course, use jam jars and anything that's transparent, but just remember that if you do that, you're going to have to change out your oils probably more like on a weekly basis, whereas these are good for 4 months. So you've got your nose down there and you want to start taking bunny sniffs. That's just like the little tiniest
bunny sniffs.
It's like a micro sniff. What you're doing is, you've seen a bunny doing that. What you want to do is you want to bring in only enough air so that it gets from the nostrils right up here. So these are, I don't want, you don't need to take a great lungful of air, because in fact, that's a bad idea. You draw, if you were to do that, you draw air up and it bypasses the place where you smell, goes straight down into the lungs.
Yeah.
Whereas if you do little tiny bunny sniffs, you're letting that aroma kind of curl up upward into your the highest part of your olfactory cleft, where it will make contact. There's something like 10% or maybe even less of all the air that we breathe in through our nose gets to the olfactory cleft. And it's a bit like if you imagined a stairwell with 4 stories in it and a window on the 3rd floor of the stairwell. Now, if you had a draft of air going up, let's say you had a lot of warm air down below and you opened that window on the 3rd floor, most of it would be drawn up like a chimney and straight out of that window. And the air at the very top of the stairwell would remain not really moving. And that's how you should imagine your olfactory cleft, which is where the olfactory epithelium is. So by taking tiny bunny sniffs, you're bringing in just enough air so that you might experience the smell without drawing it all the way down into your lungs. And of course, you can't keep that up for a long time, so you might do some little bunny sniffs. Then you might breathe normally. And while you're doing it, you need to go right down inside the experience. It's a really hard thing to explain. I would recommend that you try and visualize the thing that you're trying to smell, that you recall any emotions that you might have associated with that. And of course, it goes without saying, there's not a thing wrong with picking up a lemon and doing the same thing instead of using lemon essential oil, or pulling a piece of lavender off when it's in bloom in the garden. We use these jars because they're practical and you can shut them at the end of the training session and go back to them the next day over and over again. And if you're using fresh things, of course, they need to be replenished all the time and there's a lot of waste and so on. So an important question that people ask is, I can't smell anything. Is there even any point? And the answer to that question is yes, there is definitely a point, because it is the act of interrogating the environment for smell and thinking about whether or not you can smell anything that is the actual work. So let me tell you a little bit about the way the olfactory bulb is. We smell with our noses. Okay, that's the bit you can see. The olfactory epithelium is this little bit of tissue, which is the size of a postage stamp at the highest part of the upper airway. And that tissue has little cilia and receptors in it, and it is connected by some very, very fine nerves that then go up through some holes in the brain, in the structure of the skull, the lower part of the skull, goes up through these little holes. It's called the cribriform plate. And they attach to the olfactory bulb, which is, it's about the size of an earthworm with a little fat bit on the end of it. And from there, a signal is sent from the olfactory epithelium to the olfactory bulb. And from the bulb, that message is projected further on into the brain. Now, here's an interesting thing that happens. When you stop smelling because you've had COVID-19 or a head injury or something like that, you don't send very many messages into the olfactory bulb anymore. And like a muscle, use it or lose it. If you're not sending messages into that olfactory bulb, it begins to diminish in size. And so that's bad news for everyone, because a diminished olfactory bulb is synonymous with depression. We know that from lots of studies. The good news is there's another way of delivering messages into the olfactory bulb, and that's from the top down. In other words, that's from the higher part of the brain into the olfactory bulb. And this is what you're doing when you're smell training. When you're thinking about smell, you're sending a message into the olfactory bulb. And that's why it's really good to do, even if you're one of these people who feels they can't smell anything. So it's not the end of the world if you start smell training and you can't smell anything. It's the thinking about smell. Another thing people ask me is they'll say, I can't remember the smell of lemon. I can't remember any smells. So how am I supposed to do this? And I would recommend that people like that just try and sharpen their observation skills for smell. And the analogy I like to use is, imagine if you were looking into a really deep well and you didn't know how deep that well is. And it could be really, really, really deep. And you drop a pebble into that well, and then you listen for the sound of the pebble hitting the water. You know that the longer the sound, the longer that you hear nothing, the fainter that signal is going to be. And you really have to, in the case of the very deep well, you would be straining to hear that sound.
You're focused, aren't you?
Yes. I want you to strain to smell something. And I can't really explain it better than that, but it is a question of fine tuning your observation skills and your concentration. Another great thing to do is to look at pictures of cookery books and try and remember what that's like. That's a great exercise. It stirs all that up.
I think everything that you're saying just sounds so much like, you've explained it really well, and you've made it sound very obvious, but if you don't know, it's not obvious. But the way you've explained it, it's like, well, of course I need to imagine what a lemon looks like, that cookery book, it's just made me think, you can feel your saliva glands kicking in, and it's all to do with memories. It's not because you're tasting it at that moment in time. And I suppose it's similar also. I remember as a child playing that game with, they're not called opal fruits now. They're called, I can't remember, starburst or something. What flavour have you got? And it's really hard because you just take it for granted when you taste it. You look at the colour. So the colour is telling you what you're tasting. But when it's taken away from you, it's quite hard to remember what that taste was.
Yeah.
So it shows it's all interconnected very closely, isn't it? So if you can kick off one, it helps the other one to kick off as well. Sure.
We haven't discussed the relationship between smell, true taste, and flavor. And that's something that, you've brought up the flavor of starbursts, and something that I would just like to touch on, because a lot of people first notice that they've lost their sense of smell when their food no longer has any taste. So we've got a language problem here that is confounding the discussion, and it works like this. Smell is very straightforward. Everyone knows what that is. The clinicians call this olfaction. What we call taste, and I always say true taste to differentiate it from this colloquial use of the word taste that we have. True taste, otherwise known as gustation, happens on the tongue, and that is salty, sweet, sour, bitter, and the savory taste, umami. Now, when we eat food and we put food in our mouths and chew, we've got a sort of washing machine effect. You're chewing the food, it's going around in circles, you're breaking it down, there's air in your mouth. And when you swallow, or when you say, this is really good, you're forcing some of that moistened, scented air that's in your mouth up through something called the retronasal passageway, which is basically the back of your throat, the connection between the back of your throat and your nose. And it forces the air up there. And so that combined odor experience that you've got from all this food in your mouth is going to the olfactory epithelium. And it is your brain that puts all of this information together, what you're experiencing in terms of true taste, what you're experiencing in terms of smell, the feel of the food in your mouth, the creaminess of it. There are a couple of other, there's something else called chemesthesis, which is the spiciness of it, or if it's cooling, if it's minty, there are sensations involved in that. And the brain puts all of that together to say, this is the flavor of the food. And because we use the term taste colloquially to mean flavor, because nobody, will say, how was your dinner? Did it taste good? What you really mean is, what was the flavor of that food like? Not, could you experience salty, sweet, sour, bitter, and umami? So very often people come into our groups and they'll say, I can smell, but I can't taste my food. And then I always think to myself, what are they actually trying to say? Are they trying to tell me that they have no experience of salty, sweet, sour, bitter, and umami? Or are they telling me that their experience of flavor, the universal experience of all those things together, is not functioning? And 99% of the time it has to do with the lack of flavor, because some aspect of their food experience has been altered. And in COVID-19, we know people do lose gustation, people do lose chemesthesis. That's when you may have seen people on YouTube, drinking bottles of vinegar or eating the hottest chilies imaginable and not even blinking. So we do know that the virus is having unexpected effects on these other things that govern our experience of flavor.
So I can't believe how quickly the time has gone, even though we've had phone calls and doorbells and things going on.
I'm sorry. Yeah.
No need to apologise at all. Now, we have funny enough in the chat, but so don't worry, I'll have a look at. There's certainly some comments going on there. But the one thing before I come to those, the one thing that because we are running out of time, did you want to talk about the mental health aspect of the impact? Because I just feel it's, even if the people that are listening to the webinar either now live or recorded, I'm sure they will potentially know somebody who has this. And I think it's really important for them to understand what it really means.
Yeah. This is one of the things that's come out of our research during the pandemic, is that and AbScent is actively involved in a number of research projects. So we do our own research with our research partners at the University of Reading and the University of London. But then we also have other outside researchers coming to us to ask us to help facilitate their own studies. So there's always a lot of research going on at AbScent. And we've done we've published a couple of papers. So with my colleagues at Newcastle and Northumbria, we've made some really interesting observations about how smell loss is affecting people's mental health. And we always knew this was a problem. The thing that I mentioned to you earlier about the loss of olfactory bulb volume being synonymous with depression. So we've known about that for a while, but really when we're in collecting people's stories and finding out just exactly what's happening in people's lives, we see disassociation, so people being completely withdrawn, people's personal relationships breaking down because it's such a difficult thing to explain. Spouses might not get it. People are having trouble with intimacy, food is gaining weight, losing weight, not being able to cook for their families, mothers feeling like they can't bond with their babies. And as you may have heard in the news recently, COVID-19 is turning out to be particularly severe in pregnant women. We have a cohort of pregnant women or young mothers on our AbScent network, and these problems are not insignificant.
Mm.
So we need to take this on board. It's not just about the food. It's not just about not being able to enjoy your cup of coffee. We're seeing smell loss flood into all areas of the human experience.
Oh.
And so we need, we've known this for a long time. We need more resources. We need better backup. We need the assistance of not just rhinologists. This is not just a problem of the nose. It is a problem that we need. We need mental health support. We need dietetic support. We need peer support. People need to feel validated. They come into our groups because they want to share their stories, and that is so therapeutic for them to realize that they are not alone.
And I suppose, our social interaction with people is, smell is very important because of the pheromones or whatever it is that goes on when you meet people. So the smell is hugely important, how we interact with people. And also, the eating side is very much about the social side and how we communicate. And if people feel those things have taken away from them, it must be hugely isolating, especially when, as is always the problem with chronic health conditions, you look absolutely fine. But you haven't got it written across your forehead saying this is the problem and what it means. So yeah.
I mean, imagine, if you've got a healthy sense of smell and you have a terrible day and you come home, what's the first thing that you reach for? Whether it's a cup of tea or a hug from your partner or a hot bath with something in the bath water, these are all, whether you recognize it or not, these are all experiences for which olfaction plays a very important function. And when you take that away, it's very difficult to self-soothe. This is a phrase we all know from babies. Babies have to learn how to self-soothe, when they get to a certain age. Well, this is a real problem. It is very, very difficult to self-soothe without a sense of smell.
I thought you were going to say a glass of wine then when you said get
well
home.
That too, but okay, well, there you go. I mean, your glass of wine might taste horrible to you.
Yeah. And I suppose that's the other thing, isn't it? The taste, it doesn't necessarily mean that you can't taste anything. It means you can sometimes taste stuff, can't you? But it's just not what you expect and not very pleasant.
No, and then we haven't really touched on parosmia, but that is a condition that's even worse than anosmia, which is the total loss of smell. Parosmia is what happens during the recovery phase and when the olfactory bulb is delivering incomplete messages to the higher part of the brain. And those incomplete messages do not give a faithful reading of what it is that you're trying to smell. And for whatever reason, and we don't really know why this is, the impressions that the brain, the feedback that you get from your brain is, this is so disgusting, you're going to have to leave the room. Very interesting study was done where they used brain imaging, functional MRI for people who have very severe parosmia and smelling certain substances. And what they found is that unusually, compared to normal people with a normal sense of smell, there was activity in the part of the brain that is associated with disgust, with feelings of disgust. And they're not quite sure whether that's a cause or an effect, but for whatever reason, the brain is reacting or responding to these stimuli with complete disgust. And that disgust can be so severe that people will walk into a room where onions are cooking or something, and they'll just be sick. They'll just vomit. So this disgust reaction can be very, very severe and can be absolutely life-altering. People lose, tons of weight, might need to be given sort of replacement meals that have no odor. It's a really very, very severe condition. Can be.
Yeah. And it's like, I feel like we've suddenly opened up another Pandora's box now, because I'm now thinking, how smell keeps you safe because you can smell burning.
Sure.
Smell stops you from eating something that might have gone off, just goes on. Very quickly.
Yep. I mean, the sense of smell is a behavioral warning system. That's
Mm.
why it's evolved to keep us safe, to keep us away from things that might harm us, make us ill or otherwise. So, yeah.
Right, very quickly, turning to a couple of questions. I lost my sense of smell pre-pandemic. I do not know why, but I think it was gradual, as I cannot remember losing it, or I can't remember it happening, which I'm sure is very what happens when you get older as well. I'm 56, so perhaps it's age-related. I wonder if loss of smell also affects people's taste too. So I think we've established smell and taste obviously are very close, but the lady who said she'd lost her smell at 56, would you think that's slightly young to lose it?
I think that would be slightly young. Yeah, I think it would. I mean, we're living in times where we can't get in to see a doctor, but I think that where you've got unexplained sense of smell loss, it's always worth being checked out and ruling out anything that might be a bit more sinister. Idiopathic smell loss is relatively common. That's where there's no known reason for it. It's a diagnosis that's given after they've eliminated basically everything else. Plenty of times the sense of smell just comes back for reasons that nobody understands. So I think if I was in this person's position, I would try and maybe wait for a long time, but get on a list so that you could be reviewed by an ENT.
And I think the answer to this question: do vitamin A nasal sprays help?
Okay, there was one piece of research. There's another one going on right now to find out whether vitamin A drops, not sprays, are helpful. And this study, which did not include a lot of people, was found that yes, vitamin A, which is known to be good for the repair of nerves, was helpful. Big problem though, you can only get this certain kind of drop in Germany.
Oh.
Or actually, there are a couple of European countries where you can get it, but it's not available in this country. Now, for this reason, people have been buying the kind of vitamin A oil that you would put in drops on your tongue. And though that vitamin A, including what you would squeeze out of a capsule, is very concentrated and is too concentrated to put into your nose. The tissues in your nose are so sensitive. You would never put anything into your nose that has not been specially formulated for it, because you risk damaging this very sensitive tissue, which is in actual fact brain tissue. So do treat the inside of your nose with greatest care. If you are really keen on trying these vitamin A drops, look for them on internet shopping websites. You can sometimes get it, and you would want to try a bottle for a month. You would use one bottle in a month. Then you would need to have a month break, because vitamin A, of course, is fat soluble. It stays in the system and you don't want to have too much of it. So I know Professor Hummel recommends 1 month on, 1 month off.
And then very lastly, because time is up, and it may sound like a very silly question, how do you know that your smell is improving? Because I was actually thinking, when you're putting the thing to your nose, if you can start smelling it here as opposed to there, you know that it's improved.
I wish there was a good answer to that question. And as I said in the beginning, smell is extremely subjective. And in addition to that, the recovery pathway from COVID-19 is chaotic. People get fluctuations, things improve, then the next day they've gone downhill again, and it becomes a very stressful situation. I'd say a bit like being on a diet. Try not to get on the scale every day; you'll just drive yourself mad. But bear in mind that it is, the best measure of whether or not you're improving is to have an objective smell test. Unfortunately, they're not really widely available in this country.
Right. Okay. You could get one. You could ask your doctor to point you towards a consultant.
You might, but there are only a handful of consultants in this country that will give the objective smell test.
Wow. Okay. Well, maybe this will get more people.
Exactly. Why is it that you can get your eyes checked and your hearing checked at Boots, but you can't get your sense of smell checked?
That's an interesting one, maybe to lobby to Boots.
Exactly.
Yeah. Well, on that note, You've got a mission now to get Boots up and running. Thank you so much, Chrissi, for your time. I just, I'm sure everyone else that's been listening in and will listen to this in the future will have just suddenly made you realise how important. It's just suddenly makes you realise, gosh, I'm so glad and so lucky that I can smell and taste what I believe to be well, and not something we shouldn't take for granted.
Yeah.
So definitely. So thank you so much for your time, and thank you everyone for joining us.
Thank you very much for having me, Catriona, and I wish everyone who's listening has a speedy recovery.
It's a pleasure. Bye.
Bye-bye now.